not be but relevant. Renewal of our mind towards a Green Deal. And I'm greatly pleased to introduce the speaker to you, who is illustrious in the field to address this issue, Dr. D.E. Benet, Vice Principal and Associate Professor in English, National College, Tiruchirappalli. With 30 years of his collegiate experience, he is a member of various academic bodies, Indian Association for American Studies, Indian Association for Canadian Studies, Organization for Studies in Literature and Environment, Indian Association for the Study of Australia, English Language Teachers Association of India. He is a resource person at UGC HRD centers at Bharatidasan University, Central University, Puducherry, University of Kerala, Bharatiyar University, on various subjects, English, history, Tamil, and fine arts. He is a member of Board of Studies for both UG and PG of many colleges in and around Tiruchirappalli, Coimbatore, Erode, Karur, and Madurai. He is a Cambridge English speaking examiner for business English. He is in the adjudication committee for the evaluation of PhD thesis. He has edited many books, one of which is to prepare our students for cracking competitive exams like NET and SET, and it is titled NET, SET, Go. It was quite amusing to read his recent publication that came up in the Hindu newspaper, which was titled Graffiti and Gaffis Gallo, which was a humorous indictment on the disappearance of graffiti writing from college walls and how these graffiti writers of yesteryears have metamorphosed into social media users. And he is also a very active member of many of the committees. It's a lot of things he has to his credit. He's organized a lot of seminars, and especially the ones related to ecology. Let me not take much time. Thank you so much, sir, for joining. We are indeed pleased to have you here for day 3 session on renewal of our minds towards a Green Deal. Welcoming Dr. D.E. Benet for the session.
Dr. Benet, could you unmute your audio, please?
Yeah. Thank you so much for those warm words of introduction, Professor Sheila. And I'm indeed pleased to be here on an evening like this. I'm really amazed to see that people have taken time to be off to listen to someone like me in the evening at 5 o'clock. This is the time they would like to spend in front of their television sets, right? Chasing the cyclones and so on in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere. I'm indeed happy, and I thank the management and the PG and Research Department of English, Mathoma College, Tiruvalla. Let me thank your principal, Dr. Varghese Matthew, and the head of the Department of English, Dr. Ashley Susan Phillip, and the convener of this seminar, Dr. Remy George, who has made it possible for me to be here. It was she who contacted me a couple of weeks ago and asked me to deliver a speech. And I'm indeed thankful to her. And I'm also thankful to Ms. Sushmita Anuvarghese, convener, and also Sanju T. Soman, student convener of this program. I was just breaking my head what I should be talking about on a seminar like this. Then Dr. Remy George told me anything to do with our ecology or with nature. So I thought I came across an interesting article more than a year ago. It was about Green Deal, making a Green Deal as individuals, as communities, as nations. We need to strike a deal, a new deal. And I was very much impressed by that article and how we have to, as citizens of this world and as members of this moribund planet, namely Earth, we have to strike a new deal and a green deal at that. so that our attitude towards nature and our attitude towards climate change and our attitude towards environmental disasters completely change. So I thought I would briefly dwell on this topic, renewal of our mind. For a long time, we have heard people talking about a shift from ego consciousness to eco consciousness. Sometimes I wonder whether such a shift has taken place. Of course, it has become a part of our public discussion, and discussing climate change and environmental disasters has become a part of our public narrative, so to speak. But I would like to point your attention to one particular aspect of ecological thinking. This is about the vanishing forests. Now today, we are facing one cyclone after another in quick succession. Now why does this happen? Because much of excess heat, at least 92% of excess heat in this planet is absorbed by the oceans. And that fuels super cyclones, hurricanes. As a result, we have floodings and we have other forms of disasters as consequences to this hurricanes and cyclones. For the simple reason that we have destroyed the forests, the oceans are absorbing the heat. So I thought I would dwell at some length on forests. And to begin with, I thought I would start with let me share this with you. Okay, hope you all can see this.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I thought I should start with this concept of biodiversity hotspots, because the whole international lecture series is about effacing a culture of extinction and exploration of green philosophies and representations. So extinction, the word extinction brings to our mind giant dinosaurs or mammoths, or we have a saying in English, dead as dodo, birds, insects. The whole ecosystem has been disturbed, and many of these species have disappeared silently. And we have promoted this culture of extinction for a very long time. And this very long time happens to be the last 400 or 500 years. And as a result of that, we are in a position, rather the world finds itself in a position where many of these things cannot be reversed. The whole world is threatened with destruction. And the term biodiversity hotspots was first used by a man by name, Dr. Norman Myers. In fact, he was a wildlife photographer. And he and others, they identified 34 such specific areas around the world that have lost 70% of their original habitat. When we talk of extinction, we have to keep in mind two things. One is the extinction of habitat itself, then the extinction of species. If the habitats disappear, the species also disappear. When the species disappear, habitats also disappear. So now, for instance, the southern part of India, we have this wonderful mountain range. We know the mountain range that separates Tamil Nadu from Kerala. And this is one of those biodiversity hotspots. But look at the human encroachment. Now, encroachment means disappearance of forests. And many geologists say in the past, in the remote past, in the distant past, whenever ice advanced, whenever the planet turned cool, the forest disappeared. ice covered the face of our planet Earth. Then whenever ice retreated, the trees just came back as if they had just recovered from a long hibernation or long sleep. So forests are essential part of our global drawdown of carbon dioxide. Now, forests, because of their sheer presence, can produce humidity, and above all, it can absorb carbon dioxide, and above all, the water molecules can be present in the air because the plants continue to breathe, the trees continue to breathe. Now, today, these forests are disappearing at a very fast rate. I will just focus your attention on those things. Right. So I'll start with a simple definition of forest given by Leroy. He simply defines forest as a wide expanse of woodlands as opposed to similar areas called the woods or biomes. And he goes on to give a lot of scientific explanation to what a forest is. So, but it is simply a word or greenery. I love this simple definitions. It's simply a word or greenery. That's a German term, a word. And this forest is nothing but a conglomerate of trees. So it is composed of trees of all ages and all species. And he enumerates the different varieties of trees. So if they are below the age of 25 years or a cluster of trees up to 25 years, he simply calls them tailies. Or between 25 to 50 or 60, he calls them gaulies, and demifutae for trees above 60 to 90 years, and anything that is above 90 years, he calls hortifutae. Kindly pardon my pronunciation. I'm not good at pronouncing these words. So that's a simple definition of forest. Now, do you hear me? Do you see me? Yes? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, there are interesting stories, myths and legends about the forest. And this is about a forest in the past and how we had developed certain myths. You are all familiar with the story of Artemis. Artemis is a Greek name for the Roman Diana. You know the story of Diana, how she was torn to pieces, how she torn to pieces, pardon me, Actaeon, the man, the shepherd who saw her in nude. She was in a place in the virgin woodlands, in a grove of pine and cypress trees, and Actaeon wandered in there along with his hounds. He was torn to pieces by his own hounds. This is the story of a man from the pastoral entering into the forest. The ancients had a clear demarcation. You had the cities or towns, and the pastorals acted as a buffer between the forest and the towns or cities or villages. So he was from the pastoral world, and he wanders into the forest. As a result, he gets destroyed by his own hounds. One of those old stories. So is the story of Dionysus. You know the story of Dionysus. And like Artemis, Dionysus is an experienced hunter. His relationship with animals is not that of predation, but one of protection or of guardianship. Now, He is the animal god, and he is forever transforming himself into a lion, into a bear, into a panther, into a snake, or a bull or a dragon. He is a god of metamorphosis or excellence. But this Dionysius was greatly upset because a cousin of Actaeon, in the previous story, you heard the story of Actaeon, a cousin, first cousin of Actaeon, and also grandson of Cadmus, the founder of the city of Thebes. He gets destroyed by this Dionysius because Pentheus never liked this rivalry. The rivalry of Dionysius, of course, god of wine, in the company of satyrs. Now, satyrs are mostly from the forest. They are called men of the woods. So, and who kills Pentheus? It's his own mother. It's very interesting in the story. His own mother, Agave, she is fully drunk, and she and all the revelers, the drunken revelers, they kill Pentheus. Very interesting stories from Greek myths and legends about encounters between people from the pastoral world or from the cities and towns with people from the forest. Now, we know the Christian cosmology, Christian cosmogony, and how God created the Garden of Eden, and how he planted these two trees, a tree of life and tree of knowledge, and how Eve, she chose the tree of knowledge, and finally how Adam and Eve were chased out of this beautiful place called Eden. So after their lapse, after their fall, they were chased out by God, and with a curse, they would earn their food by the sweat of their brow. So they lost that pre-lapsarian bliss and so on. That's also another interesting story, the story of Noah and the great deluge, how waters covered the earth. And after 40 days of hard rain, right, and all the places, the vales, valleys, everything, including the oceans, all the water spread across the land, and everything went down under the water. So you know that story, which I don't have to retell you. But once the waters drained, the trees came back, the life forms came back. So that is another story related to fathers. In the Hindu cosmology, there is this belief once the world comprised of 7 island continents, and this story appears in Vishnu Purana. The central part of this island, or the central island, is called Jambudvaipa. Now, Dvaipa means island, and the central one, it is full of jamun trees. And that's an interesting story. This jamun tree kept producing fruits which were almost elephant-like, and how this jamun, they broke and they rolled down from the top of a mountain, and how they formed the Jambu Nadi. Very interesting story. And in our Indian culture, we know how there is something called Aranya Sanskriti, a culture, a forest culture, which persisted and pervaded our human thinking, because initially in this country, the forests were cleared on the banks of river Ganges and other plains of northern part of India, and how human settlements started and so on. So we have a long stories. I don't have the time to retell you all these stories, but this one I missed out in the middle. That is the epic of Gilgamesh. He was a Sumerian ruler, and in this interesting story, now Gilgamesh, he was a king of Uruk, and he had to fight a battle with the demon from the forest by name of Huawa. It's an interesting story. And this epic of Gilgamesh survives thanks to a king like Ashurbanipal, who was a lover of literature, and humans conquering the forest. Now, the central part of all these stories, coming into civilization, coming into contact with nature, and human encroachment of forests. And finally, what has happened to these forests and what has happened to the human beings. Now, the stories are told and retold. Now, let me focus your attention on some of this literature. This is for our understanding. I'll come to my main part a little later. So it's good to know that we have such myths and legends, and also we have such literature in existence. There was this medieval epic titled Valentine and Orson. We do not know who the writer is. It's an anonymous work. And in this story, Valentine and Orson, now, Valentine is basically from the forest, and he lives in forest. And what happens here is, in this story, it's a wonderful myth and it's a wonderful legend. And in this story, we find him. For a long time, he lives a life of a hermit, but he comes back to the city. He is brought back to the city. There he becomes a king and he is taught the way of the world, how humans live. But after some time, he lives at the peak of his power back to the jungle. He goes back to where he came from. Now, for a long time, the idea of a forest or forestier remained in the minds of people. This is where your law stops. There were two kinds of thinking in ancient past. One was, this was a place there was no human law in operation, no civic jurisdiction. It is beyond the pale of human law. So that's why we have this interesting word in English language. It's jungle law. Jungle law means anything can happen to anyone at any time, and there is no social order, and there is nothing to control anyone. Because the place that is called forestier is meant for all the social outcasts, a place for robbers, a place for bandits, a place for social outcasts, and a place for lepers, a place for hermits, and for sages, and people who have decided to keep themselves away from human culture. For them, the forest is a wonderful refuge. That is the place where they take refuge, and that is the place where they live. As a result, there is no law binding on them. The ancient Romans made it very clear. This is the place where no human law operates. But on the other hand, there was another thinking, which was an extreme form of thinking. The forest belongs to the king. Forest belongs to the ruler. So this was an interesting work that appeared somewhere around 1598. This man, by name John Manwood, who lived in the times of Queen Elizabeth, and he was a member of Lincoln Inn, a barrister from Lincoln Inn, and he was also a judge, and above all, he was a gamekeeper. And in his treatise of the laws of the forest, he says, the forest belongs to the queen, the forest belongs to the ruler, and it is the duty of the citizen to protect the wildlife as well as the trees. Around this time, there was a large-scale felling of the trees. You know, during the 16th century, the great voyages started. Of course, it started during the end of the 15th century. And throughout the 16th century, the voyages took place. and people were building navy, armada, and they were building homes also in cities like London, and they were felling trees at random and indiscriminately. As a result, the forest area was thinning, the forest cover was thinning. So he was very much concerned. Look at it, it was written as early as 1598. Disappearance of forest means disappearance of species, especially foxes, wolves, rabbits. So it's a very interesting book by John Manwood, and he says this forests are for the rulers, for the nobility, and for the king or the queen. And ordinary citizens have no business to enter. It is a place of exclusivity for the king or queen to hunt. Now, what does this hunt demonstrate? It simply demonstrates that the king or the queen not only subjects her citizens, and even the animals and other species, birds, are under her control. That's an interesting story about William the Conqueror, the French king who invaded England in 1066. And I came across this very interesting piece of information which says he was the father of stags. Now, William the Conqueror as the father of stags, very interesting piece of information. Why? He was fond of hunting stags, and he thought the stags were his exclusive property. And remember, when the French invaded England, there were so many clearings, land clearings, and there were, at that point, there were nearly 1,000 Bretwaldas. There were 1,000 kings, small kings here and there. He closed down all these settlements and colonies in the midst of forests. What happened was history. The forest regained, then the forest covered these old towns and cities. So that is why there is this interesting expression in English. When the cities destroy within in, the forests come without. So soon the buildings and the homes and everywhere you find trees sprouting, and trees come and conquer cities once the settlements are removed. Very interesting story about him. Now look at Shakespeare's work, where forests are mentioned. I'm not going to tell you the story. You are aware of the story. Shakespeare's As You Like It. It happens in Arden Forest, and it is called a pastoral comedy, and also a Midsummer Night's Dream. Most of the events happen in a forest. Okay, so now people were writing about forests, and forests even became locales for telling stories. In India, we have beautiful stories, right? All those stories are localized stories and stories. You will always find a reference to forest. Now, come back. This person, John Evelyn, the man who wrote his diaries, he had written this book called Sylvan Forest. Silva, the word refers to forest. As early as 1664, there was this shortage of wood. England was trying to build a powerful navy, and there was a short supply of wood. Very interesting. And it talks about why forests should be saved. Well, I'll quickly go through, the time is very short. You find Alexander Pope writing a work called Windsor Forest, right? He talks about today a palace stands there, Windsor. The Windsor Palace stands in the midst of a wooded area. It's no longer a forest. And we all know Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature in America. He writes, and Thoreau's Waldo, this is life in isolation, life in the woods. A Spartan life, how you could live. He lived for nearly 200 days, 2 years and 2 months and 2 days that he spent in Walden. It's a very interesting story, and that is a self-supportive life. Very interesting how we can separate ourselves. But the major one about ecological disaster or felling of trees is by Gerard Manley Hopkins. His simple poem, Binsley Poplars, written in sprung rhythm as early as 1879, but it got published only in the 1920s, where he bemoans the felling of poplar trees. So, forests always catch the imagination of popular writers. So, you find Rudyard Kipling writing this Jungle Book and creating a fantastic story about animals and humans and making forests dislocate. But in the beginning of 20th century, the 20s and the 30s, when Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote Tarzan of the Apes, for the first time, here is a human being who lives in a forest and who tries to build a bridge between the way of life in the forest and the way of life in cities. So Tarzan of the Apes, a very interesting story. You must have seen the film. And Johnny Weissmuller, a popular swimmer and Olympic winner in swimming competition, he essayed the role of Tarzan in the early films. Then Lee Falk, he created this beautiful comic strip. It was Lee Falk who created Mandrake the Magician, and it was the same Lee Falk who created the Phantom. Now, the ghost that walks, and he has this horse named Hero and a wolf named Devil, and he lives among the Bandar people who are almost pygmies. So he lives in a cave, and it's a beautiful story. I have read many of these comic pieces. Now, these are some of the references to literature and thereof. Now, look at it. Trees. I'm just trying to focus your attention on myths, legends, and this is not the time to give a detailed talk about all these stories, but I'll be just touching upon and giving you an overview so that you can go and read and explore and find for yourself some of these interesting facts related to forests. Okay. When Pratik Kishan he wrote the book Trees of Delhi, you know Delhi is situated on Aravalli Hills, and there are certain reserve areas near Delhi, and you know those who have been to Delhi, you know areas for forests within the city and even outside the city on the Aravalli ranges. So it's one of those recent records of Trees of Delhi, and many botanists and biologists. They have collected plenty of detail about the trees of this country. I'm not getting into this, but remember, apart from these trees, things like, you know, whether it is coconut or palmyra or banyan tree or peepal tree or jacaranda, you know, it's a beautiful violet, it bears violet color flowers, or the very common casuarina or sundari tree. They have all been talked about in our epics and in our Puranas. They find place. But interestingly enough, in the Brahma Purana, it talks about Akshayavada. Vada means tree. And there is even a city here in India. Well, Vadodara in Gujarat, it's perhaps one of the cities are named after a tree, and in India we have this banyan tree found in almost all parts of the country. You have this huge banyan tree in Chennai and Adaya, and you have one in Kolkata, and there is this Dodda Alamara in Bangalore, and you have such trees in Thiruvananthapuram and elsewhere. So now the trees, the banyan trees. And of course, I'm not going to discuss coconut trees and how it is a part of our become part of our everyday life and how we are so much dependent on the products. I think it was the year 2018 when this Oki cyclone struck. It did not bring much rain, but I was traveling from Tiruchirappalli to a nearby place where my parents lived, and 50 kilometers away from here. I was driving the day after the cyclone struck, and it was a very sad sight to see, because all these coconut trees and other trees, they appeared twisted, as if their heads were twisted by a very violent force, and all their branches were broken and the fronds were stripped away. So it was such a pathetic sight which I had never seen in my life. So now palmyra trees, coconut trees, right, they're all disappearing. We are clearing the lands, and even the coconut groves are disappearing. In one of the ancient Tamil poetry, it is called Tala Vilasa. Say, there is something called Tala Vriksha. Every temple in our country, especially in the southern part of India, they boast of a rare tree. That's called Tala Vriksha. Now, in this Tamil poem, Tala Vilasa, there is this interesting fact. It carries a mind-boggling 801 uses of palmyra. It is the official tree of our state, but it is fast vanishing. So now such trees are vanishing, and our habitats are disappearing. And what is happening in this part of the world or in other parts of the world is something tragic, to say the least. But people tried to reverse and alter, and they tried to what we call afforestation. They tried afforestation, but there is a distinction between afforestation and reforestation. But I would like to focus your attention on two people. They both were environmental thinkers, come practitioners. So one was Ebenezer Howard. Now, he lived during the last part of the 19th century, and it was he who designed modern day cities. Say they call these radial cities. You have the central business district, or what they call CBD, now surrounded by business districts, and the city radiates in different, in all the directions. So now he thought we have to create gardens, and the gardens should form a ring around this expanding, what we call these concentric circles of expansion. So he decided to surround these cities with the trees, right? And it was kind of a green belt, yes. So Ebenezer Howard, he introduced the concept of garden cities. As a result, they started planting what we call these boulevard trees, huge trees inside cities, which would act as barrier so that even if the city wants to expand or develop, it cannot. And after a few kilometers, you can develop only satellite towns or the suburban. If you want to go to the suburban from the central part of the city, you have to pass through this green corridor. Okay. So, interesting concept by Sir Ebenezer Howard. And of course, we are all familiar with Akira Miyawaki. He wrote this book, The Healing Power of Forests, the philosophy behind restoring Earth's balance with the native trees. So, now what is he trying to say? You know, we had planted invasive species, non-native species. As a result, we had destroyed the groundwater, especially in Tamil Nadu. We had the social forestry scheme. Now, as per the social forestry scheme, they distributed eucalyptus saplings. The small town I come from, Pudukkottai, near Trichy, they went and planted, as a part of the social forestry scheme, they planted eucalyptus and the water table went down and it depleted the groundwater. Now, Mayawati's method, it talks about using native trees and protecting and preserving native trees. So now they developed the nurseries. Now, developing these nurseries is not something new. Even the place, in Tiruvalla, you have these cows, the concept of cows, right? I do not know whether I pronounced that correctly, where palmyra are kept and they are protected in nursery-like places where the trees are well protected. So that, he says, we can develop multi-layered forests. People, of course, call this crowd foresting and so on, and there are many detractors. They say this is not an answer for our ways of denuding the trees, but cities and towns across India and in different parts of Southeast Asia, they have taken to Akira Miyawaki's method so that they could build such small forest clusters even in the middle of urban centers. So there were many movements to restore trees and to protect trees. Chief among them was the Chipko movement in India. The Chipko movement, Chipko means young race. This happened in the Himalayas, and they were all opposed to commercial logging. Even trees were cut down. And these people who followed the Gandhian philosophy, and they used non-violent methods by hugging the trees and literally protecting the trees from the chainsaw. And they protected the trees from axe and other forms of way of felling trees. And it all began in 1973. And people like Sundarlal Balgana, Sarala Ben, Vandana Shiva, they were all in the forefront. And it all happened in the Alaknanda Valley. As a result of the protest and this movement, 12,000 square kilometers of sensitive watershed was saved. And of course, we know forest played a significant role in the evolution of Indian civilization. And I already told you something about this Aranya Sanskriti, or a forest culture. And what happened when the British came, whatever they did in Canada, whatever they did in America, they did the same thing. It resulted in lumberjacking and cutting down precious trees from the Himalayas and exporting them. And the arrival of paper, the arrival of large-scale printing of paper industry, which required wooden pulp and so on. Well, it all resulted in the disappearance of forests. I'll give you certain facts related to them. And before that, some of these movements. For instance, there was this movement in America called the Earth First Movement. But before what Dave Foreman did, in the 19th century itself, they created this Yellowstone National Park. They started building sanctuaries, parks, so that nature could be saved. As early as 1872, Yellowstone National Park was created. And today, many wildlife enthusiasts and many tourists, they flock to this place, Yellowstone National Park. But this man did something quite significant. This Earth First activist, he didn't say America first, he said Earth first. And he set aside millions of acres of land as ecological reserves all across the United States. Here I want to maintain a distinction between conservation ethic and preservation ethic. Is there a difference? Yes, there is a difference. Conservation ethic tells us that you protect the natural resources for future use. You conserve, right? So then you make use of these natural resources. Then you conserve and it goes on. But preservation ethic tells you, you keep it in its pristine form. You do not destroy these natural resources. You allow them to exist independently without any human intervention. So preservation ethic says that whatever is existent now, whatever is extant now, you need to preserve it for the future. There is a slight difference, but not much to worry about. So then, this great movement called Green Belt Movement. You must have heard of Wangari Maathai, the great Kenyan environmentalist. Now she's no more. She passed away in the year 2011, but she did something very significant for the eastern part of Africa. She believed in environmental rehabilitation, conservation, and of course, sustainable development. And she was worried how the colonial disruption, how it affected the traditional patterns of pastoral herding, and how even the grasslands disappeared, and how the grazing land disappeared. Along with it, the forest also disappeared. And in its place, desertified lands, they came into place. So there is this Tamil epic Tolkappiyam, which talks about 4 distinct parts of land, right? Kurunji, Mullai, Marugam, Neithal. Now, Kurunji is about the hills. Now, Mullai is about the forest and scrubland. The forest you can find on top of the hills too. Forest you can find on the plains, that is Marugam. It is crops grow, and you can see forest here also. Neithal, that is seashore. So mountains, forests, plains, and seashore. Now, according to Tolkappiyam, Palai is desert land, right? Those who are familiar with the concept of Thinai, I'm not going to talk about Thinai. So, any of this land can be desertified. They can turn into deserts. As a result, the species will be affected and life forms will disappear. Okay, so now she did something significant, Wangari Maathai. So, and women as farmers, in their economy, African women played a very crucial role, an important role, and how land yielded poorly and how the surface soil ran off whenever it rained. And because of these eroded soils, they had to trek a very long distances to obtain wood for cooking and even for heating. So now Wangari Maathai, another important, now look at the Chipko movement in India and the Green Belt movement in Kenya and Earth First movement. They were all activists trying and working overtime to protect forests. Now, some of the facts related to forests, why and trees, why plant trees? Now look at this. All this I collected from a reliable source. Now, look at this. Planting 2 billion acres of trees could remove 2/3 of all emissions that started with the industrial era and human activity. If only we could plant 2 billion acres of trees. Now there is a call to plant 1 trillion trees. You must have heard of Greta Thunberg, and these young students, school-going students, they gave a clarion call. They even abstained from the schools on every Friday to drive home the point that it's high time that we planted trees. So 2 billion acres of land could completely reverse, and they could absorb the carbon dioxide or the hydrocarbons that's present in the air, because they are going to act as carbon sinks. The forests are going to act as carbon sinks. And it's very clear the global forest area cannot shrink by more than 2 million square kilometers. We cannot allow it to shrink. It has to be increased to 9.5 million square kilometers. Why? The current population of the world is 7.7 billion. It will reach 9.7 billion in 2050. We are already talking about carbon footprints that every human being lives, and how much of carbon will be exhumed, and it will escape, and we will spew into the outer space. We do not know. Now, There are plans to limit the global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, according to Al Gore, the former Vice President of the United States of America, the last 5 years are the hottest in human history. And temperature is rising. And we need to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we know how Antarctic is melting and Arctic has almost melted to be replenished with snow and ice only during winter. Most of the parts of the northern hemisphere, they have lost their glaciers and ice cover that we know. There is nothing called the permafrost anymore in Greenland and in countries like Finland and elsewhere. That also we are aware of. So today, carbon sequestration has become very important, and forests are going to play a very crucial role. And there is also this need to provide clean air to the choking cities. Delhi is choking, so is Beijing, and many cities in China and India and in Pakistan, they are all choking. Why? Because of increased human activity and our large-scale use of fossil fuel and also coal-fired energy production. Look at the National Thermal Power Corporation. They have, whether it is in Tamil Nadu, on the coastal area, and all over the country, NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation, they have their own, what we call their factories to produce electricity. Right. Okay, this I already told you. And we need to plant trees. I'll quickly finish. Now, in the other part of the world, something terrible is happening. That is the Amazon, which is home to 390 billion trees. Very significant number. But every day, the number is getting reduced, and huge tracts of forest land, they are getting converted either into arable lands or into human dwellings. So now, inside the crucible of this ancient forest, relentless colonization and vandalism continues. And ever since Jair Bolsonaro took over as the president of Brazil, right, deforestation has accelerated to 92%. This is a very important study, and the world is losing its green lungs. There is this indigenous tribe called Caripuna tribe, which lives there, and there is this reserved or protected territory earmarked for them, and that comprises 23% of the Brazil will be allowed to survive, whereas the rest will be vandalized and converted into empty tracts of land. You know what will happen? We are talking about extinction, and if extinction happens in Amazon rainforest, which is known for 427 species of mammals, and it is also home to jaguars, anacondas, even pink river dolphins and spider monkeys and so on. And remember, this Amazon forest can store up to 120 billion metric tons of carbon, almost equivalent to 12 years of global emissions at current rate. So many people are worried, environmentalists and environmental activists are worried that the Amazon has reached its tipping point. And a tipping point after which there cannot be any kind of recovery, which will also potentially affect climate something happening. I'll just take a couple of minutes before I close. Now, I want us to develop a kind of intelligence. I'll come to that, called environmental intelligence. Something good is also happening. You must have heard of the Great Green Wall of Africa. This is a huge project which began in 2007, and the idea is to reforest 247 million acres of degraded land. Now, this is happening in a place called the Sahel, and Sahel is the region which has the Sahara to the north and the Sudanian savanna to the south. This is the in-between region that is called the Sahel, and it runs 4,850 miles along to its southern edge. It is well funded by World Bank, and they have earmarked $8 billion. And they hope to restore this land, and it is expected to absorb 250 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. Along with that, they believe it will prevent the Sahara from encroaching the rest of Africa. The desertification continues, and in no way you can convert Sahara into an arable land because it is desert, but you can prevent sandstorms. You can prevent so many things, the sand from advancing into human habitat. Okay, now a couple of things. Now, in Europe, something significant is happening. They call this a rewilding. That is disappearing wetlands. I take just 5 more minutes, perhaps. Now, that is converting the wetlands, salt marshes, and peatlands and grasslands, because they have found out, they have discovered these wetlands can be converted, or these moors and bogs and mires can be converted into places of carbon drawdown or carbon sinks. In India, we have wonderful wetlands. Next to Chennai, you have nearly 600 tanks and another 1,400 ponds. It's a wetland, right? The entire eastern coast. Yesterday, Kalina, also known as Kodiyakarai, where the herons have arrived. It is so beautiful. They have come, they have migrated from Russia, from Iran, and certain parts of Gujarat. During the winter season, they come here and they have built their nests, and this is the time, and they have seen a few hatchlings also. So now look at the Sundarbans, the home to mangroves, right? The salt-resistant mango plants, and home for Bengal tigers, and the great run of Kutch. These are all habitats which are facing extinction. Now, that is the saddest thing. And we need to have this Green Deal. I'm going rather slow because I know I'm trying to dump too much of information in too short a time. I believe that we humans need to develop environmental intelligence. We are talking about environment consciousness, but what is this environmental intelligence? We need to know why these trees are important, why these wetlands are important, and why this wilderness is important, and how we have to preserve them. I'm not talking about going to some other country or traveling to remote parts, even in our own homes. So we can have our own backyard trees, and the governments can come forward to increase the number of national parks, the sanctuaries. And like we have this corporate social responsibility, we have to create something called corporate environmental responsibility. Now, in order to create such corporate environmental responsibility, we have to have this increase in the green tax. If you are going to destroy the environment, if you are going to pollute the environment, we have to make the corporate houses to pay a special tax called green tax. This is money paid for harming the environment. We have to fine them, we have to pay them a huge sum for destruction. Say, nations were demanding, the former colonies were demanding their colonizers a reparation for colonizing their lands, for destroying their lands, and they were seeking a reparation. So similarly, we have to seek a reparation from these companies. And also, we need to intensify green audits. That is, how a company functions and what are the measures that the company takes and the effects of their products the company and its products and how they degrade the environment. And we have to subject these organizations to a green audit. And we have to identify individuals and companies that do a lot of greenwashing within people. Now, what is this greenwashing? These companies and factories which pollute our surroundings, which destroy the groundwater. I'm not going into that, but you know how the tanning industries have destroyed the underground water. Say, I lived in a place called Renewal in North Arcot district. Downstream, the Pala River remains even polluted today. Of course, they have erected effluent treatment plants and so on. But according to a World Health Organization study, the environs of Ambur, Wanyanbadi, and Gudiadan, they are unfit for human consumption. They are not portable. You cannot drink them for next to 200 years, thanks to the tanning industries. But the damage has been done. But greenwashing. You know what happened in Thoothukudi? I'm not going into that. The companies claim the Sterlite, for instance, it claimed it is running schools, it is running hospitals. That is called greenwashing. Like whitewash, this is greenwashing. We have to be aware of. And above all, initiate green economics. That is the ways of making and using money that do not harm environment or destroy natural resources. This is easier said than done. I know that, but we need to prepare our minds towards such a green deal. Okay. Now, if we do that, I think we'll be able to save or protect our planet. And how do we do that? And people from the Department of English, Department of Literature, and many have resorted to writing what we call green poetry. You must have heard of this word, green poetry, where your concerns are about felling of trees, your concerns are about pollution, or you write a novel like Don DeLillo, who wrote his famous White Noise, or his Underworld, where he talks about the garbage mountains, vying with the skyscrapers in his beautiful novel, Underground. So there are writers, there are hundreds of them, and they are doing their part. But as individuals, we have to do our part. And we can do that by greening our mind. Now, what do I mean by greening our mind or renewal of our mind? We have to be eternally conscious of this. Now, what do you mean by eternally conscious? Very often women say, you men are not conscious when you move in the public sphere or in the public space. Whereas we women are always conscious that we are women whenever we are in the public space or in a public sphere. Now, that is being eternally conscious. And people who are suppressed and people like the indigenous people or people like the blacks and others, they are eternally conscious of the color of the skin. Likewise, we human beings have to become eternally conscious of greening this world and protecting this world. We have been conscious for very wrong reasons. We know this beautiful saying, all are born free, all are born equal, and all are born free. Fine. We are all born equal and we are born free. But we have to be conscious of not the color of our skin, not our gender, not our class, but conscious of nature. Now, that will become a green mindset. And we have to reset ourselves, reset our minds. We have to reorient ourselves, reorient our thinking, reorient our philosophy, reorient our way of living. And we have to strike this green deal. Individuals with the communities to reduce carbon footprints between communities and governments, between governments and nations. Now, when we move towards a green deal and when we have this environmental intelligence, I'm sure we'll be able to save the world. Thank you for the opportunity, and I don't think I have taken much of your time. And Dr. Remicherian told me that I can take a little time more. Well, to sum up, I started with myths and legends and bit of literature, and I moved on to things in different parts of the world and movements in different parts of the world. Then about the Amazon and also about the Great Green Wall of Africa and about green auditing and making a green deal. Thank you so much. You can talk a lot for semester, for one full semester or two full semesters about the environment, because it has also become a critical category today, like gender, like class, like race. Nature has also become, and in this case, forest has become a category because we humans treat the forest as the other. The other, which we cannot, which we claim that we have conquered, which we have subjugated, but that is not for our good. Thank you.
Hello, sir. So thank you so much for that fruitful session. And I feel that you have, sparked off a scope for other discourses. The way the questions are coming up, people would like to know about, there are many relevant questions coming up. So one by one, is it all right?
Let them ask, they'll get the best out of me. Right.
Okay. Sir, here we have a question. Energy is one of the most influential sectors in recent years.
Yes.
So optimal management of the sector will be of great importance. In your opinion, what will be the energy management issues in the future?
In future, okay. See, we talk about the renewable energy. One is the solar energy, the other one is the wind energy. These two are termed as renewable energies. And we haven't explored the wave energy. Okay, so the waves are eternally splashing against the shores, and we haven't developed a technology to harness that wave energy. But as of now, we have two renewable energies, and we are trying to produce electricity, and we are trying to run our buses, cars with the help of solar energy. But we have to produce lithium cells or batteries on a large scale to store this energy. Future, of course, the future belongs to this production of renewable energies, because the sunshine is going to be there. And I don't know whether we have built infrastructure here in India or in any part of Asia. I think China is doing its bit to move away from fossil fuel and coal-fired energy production or nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, people call it clean energy, but what do we do to nuclear waste? We are not told. What happens to the nuclear waste? Where are they buried? How deep they are buried? And what will happen if something like a nuclear war happens? What will be the reaction of this nuclear waste which we have dumped? Where are they dumped? The government in India, we are not told where they are dumped. In America also, they are not telling us where the nuclear waste goes. Though we claim nuclear energy to be clean energy. I think we have to move away from nuclear energy, though people claim it to be clean energy. And whether we have the wherewithal or that technological know-how to produce lithium batteries, lithium cells. Now, after usage, how will you dispose these lithium batteries and the lithium cells? We have a problem. I'm not a futurologist, so I'm not able to predict anything, but these are the problems that we have at hand. I think I have answered partly your question. Yeah.
Okay. So Senthil Kumaran, he asks, you have provided ample example on the global scenario. Why don't you say something about regional writings? What about Tamil novel Cho Dharman's shul that also speaks about the environment.
That's true. There are saying so Dharmans, and there is this Malayalam novel also, Enda Magaje. This is about, yeah. Am I pronouncing it properly? Yeah. Okay. No, that's also a novel.
Ambiga Sudan Mangad. Yeah.
Mangad. And it's about Endo Salman. Okay, I know that. Yeah, there are plenty of works. There are plenty of regional works available in Malayalam, in Tamil, and in other languages. So now, how many of our people read these books to be sensitized? So we talk about the consciousness raising and sensitization. Are we buying such books and reading them? And are we altering our lifestyle after reading such books? I'm not very sure. So for instance, how many of us still go and ask for plastic bags? How many of us go to the butcher shop with a silver container to buy your mutton or chicken or fish? We still go and demand plastic, and that to poor quality plastic. And we also demand extra bags of plastic. So if there is no change in our behavior, I'm talking about at a very local level, right? So we need to avoid plastics. We have to shun plastics. But have we done that? We haven't done that. So there has to be a change in our mindset. And this idea has to penetrate slowly into our human minds. It's a good thing that the Supreme Court has made it mandatory for our undergraduate students. They have to study a paper compulsorily on environment. I think to a certain extent we have succeeded in instilling in our students' young minds the idea of conserving and protecting our planet.
Sir Priya Daniel, she is also asking you to suggest some literary works by Indian writers narrating the precarity of nature. If you can suggest some prominent literary works.
Now Indian writers, say yes. For example, Indra Sinha, when he wrote, of course he lives in England, when he wrote this work, what's that, Animals People? Yeah, right, Animals People. Now he was writing about this 1984 Bhopal gas leak. Now recently I read a very sad story in the Hindu, I suppose. Those who had survived the Bhopal gas leak and who had managed to live almost up until this March, many of them died because of COVID-19, because their bodies lacked immunity. And later they discovered all these deaths in Bhopal happened. They were all earlier victims of the Bhopal gas leak. And it's very sad. And people write such novels. They are called green novels. And Indra Sinha is one example. There are many such writers. So you need to go and explore. Methyl isocyanate. I think methyl isocyanate, that was the gas that leaked from Bhopal and killed. And there were many books about that. You just go and search Bhopal gas tragedy or methyl isocyanate and novels and works related to that. There are many non-fictional works and fictional works related to that. And whatever is happening, if you happen to read Maheshwara Devi, she talks about the tribals and indigenous people and how they struggle hard to protect their resources. And Maheshwara Devi is a wonderful writer, and she writes in such a style. Go and explore her works about the tribal folks and the struggle that they have undertaken to protect their way of life, their indigenous way of life. And it is interesting that indigenous people, First Nations, and tribals, they write a lot about environmental degradation, because they have first-hand knowledge of what is happening in their own backyard.
Okay, so we have another question here. How does the developmental strategies and ecological concerns go together in the present scenario?
developmental strategies and ecological
concern. How can they go together?
Okay. I think the Paris climate deal makes it very clear. Say, many nations, nearly 197 nations, or 92 nations, I'm not very sure, they are signatories to this Paris climate deal till Donald Trump withdrew from that. Say, now, the climate deal makes it very clear how our developmental concerns and environmental concerns should go together. It is not development for the sake of development. Say, recently I read an interesting concept. That is, why should big companies talk about the profits all the time? Why should they always talk about expanding their business? It's an interesting question he asks. That is, if you are concerned about your environment and you are also concerned about your development. So now your development, yes, it should take into account environmental concerns. And if you are going to produce more and more and more and more, and if you are going to increase your profits, and profit making alone is your motive, it is certainly going to affect the environment. So the company needs to draw their boundary. This is one concept. Then there is this shoemaker whose concept of Intermediate Technology Development Group, ITDG, Intermediate Technology Development Group. Instead of going for extreme technologies in the name of development, let us draw a line and let us not go for extreme technologies which destroy the environment, which destroy nature, and which leads to depletion of natural resources. So he says, so Shoemaker says, Intermediate Technology Development Group, let us not go for extreme technologies. Let us limit ourselves, and we need to draw boundaries. Let us not go beyond this. And by doing so, I think we can take care of this too, this ecological concern. Of course, we need to get clearance from environmental ministry and so on. There are so many such things, and sometimes they even to construct a road, and even if there are clumps of trees are found there, they have to veer away from those trees in order to construct roads. They are doing things on a small scale here and there. And one of those things that we have to do is we have to find alternative ways of consumption, including our food consumption. We are converting large tracts of forest and even converting other land into arable lands, and we are converting them and bringing cash crops and so on. So it is not development for the sake of development, which is the idea of cancer cell. It multiplies, it keeps on multiplying. And we should not have a cancerous model for capitalist development. Hope I have answered you.
Yes, sir. This response have answered two more questions which were asked. Won't corporate environment responsibility be way too difficult to be realized? What challenges does consumerism?
Now could you please repeat it?
Sorry, sir. You can continue.
No. Could you please repeat the question slow?
Yes. Won't corporate environment responsibility be way too difficult to be realized? And something that can go along with the question is, what challenges does consumerism pose for the goal of environmental sustainability?
Environmental sustainability. Okay. Now, when I talked about corporate social responsibility, I think that they have to work their profits, it's 2%, I suppose, which they have to spend on social development and so on. Now, what I suggested was corporate environmental responsibility. This morning, I read a news item here. This was Kumbakonam City Union Bank Limited. They have dredged a huge tank, and they have strengthened the bunds of the tank. Now, water can be stored, a huge amount of water can be stored in that tank. And they have also planted native species, nearly 1,000 trees on the bunds to strengthen the bunds. Okay, it was an interesting piece of news that can be found in today's Hindu. Now, the bank, which is making a small profit, they know their social responsibility and environmental responsibility. So there are hundreds of tanks and hundreds of water bodies in our state, and maybe in our country and in many parts of our country. So these industrial houses should come forward, but we have to be very cautious of this greenwashing, which I talked about. Now, after destroying the environment, after degrading the land, they come and do this greenwash. But beware of this. But if an industrial house comes forward to create such islands of greenery and to restore our water bodies and to strengthen, but the problem is, right, they don't show much interest and they don't have even an industrial house which produces chemicals. They have their R&D department. Pharmaceutical houses have R&D department. And these industrial houses, they do not have an R&D department which can go and explore the land outside and come up with the solutions which can be implemented by these industrial houses. I think they need to create a separate green R&D wing so that they can address these environmental concerns. So I don't have any such a solution because sometimes in India, they get bogged down in all this bureaucratic tapeism and nothing happens in this country. But if we can come forward, industries and communities, they have to come together. Now today I find there is a gap between industries and communities. Between industries and institutions, like educational institutions, they have created bridges. But between communities, industries and communities, I think they have to build bridges so that they can address the environmental concerns of these local communities and they can use their profits to build their lives and protect their environment. Yeah.
So here is a relevant question coming. Is such a balance between development and conservation possible when people are not even allowing the rainwater to sink into the earth?
Okay. So, well, Al Gore has written a book titled Earth and Balance. Okay. Now we have to find a balance. Even as individuals, we have to find our mental equilibrium. Right? We talk about our emotional wellness and so on, and how we have to find an equilibrium. And we have to find a social equilibrium too. And we need to find a balance. Well, how to find this balance? That's a $1 million question, for which I don't have the expertise to answer. But all I can say is this. Now, sustainability is one thing, sustainable development. We hear this word. I'm always wary of using this word as sustainable. Now, in order to sustain something, you have to retain your interest in that. All right? We always say you have to sustain your interest. You have to sustain your effort. You have to sustain. For a long time, I used this word sustain with the effort, interest, passion, and so on. So now, if you are going to have a development that happens at the same time, our natural resources are not exploited, and they are. How is it possible? You can ask. Because we are dependent on this earth for all the resources. So there are resources which can be regenerated. Okay. There are certain things which can be recycled. So we have to explore. For example, water can be recycled. Say, I was in Australia. I was in the city of Melbourne for a short period of 1 month. And I found in all the homes, the wastewater is not, there are no gutters or sewers in which the water is let out. Instead, There is a recycling plant which works in a locality or in a home. So the water that is pumped into your home, it is recycled. Okay, so there is no pumping of water from the ground. So the water table is well maintained. Here in Tamil Nadu, there is a law that every home should have a rainwater catchment. Well, I have one rainwater catchment and it gives me thousands of liters of water, right? I direct the rainwater that falls on my terrace by closing some of those water outlets. I keep only one water outlet that flows straight into the rainwater catchment that I have. I'm trying to save. And it has to be made mandatory. And companies, factories, homes that do not follow this, something like even rain water catchment, they have to be penalized. See, look at the people who are walking without wearing a mask, and the government says you will be fined. But the law enforcement authority, they do not have the courage to impose such fine, right? And the government says wear your helmet and drive your vehicle. People drive their two-wheelers with impunity without wearing a helmet. Wear your seat belt and drive. People do not care. Now, it has to be drilled or drilled into human heads. How can that be done? Only by penalizing them. But here in India, we fight shy of penalizing people. Right? In the West, they penalize them for everything. Even when you cross the road at the wrong time or at the wrong point, you are penalized. If you drive your car where you are supposed to drive at 80 kilometers per hour and you drive at 100 kilometers per hour, a slip comes to you from the traffic department and you have to pay through your nose, $100, $200. And in a no parking area, you park your vehicle, you are observed and you are fined. Even when you go to a school to drop your child, you have to park your car in the designated slot. So if you don't park your car in the designated slot, you have to be fined. I think we have to enforce this kind of, it's a mild punishment. You are not throwing them in jail. You penalize them, right? Then I think it will work. And in due course, it will become our way of life. And if you break the law and if you disobey something, then you have to pay a fine, right?
Correct.
I think, I don't know.
And
solutions can be found, right?
And so that question was from Dr. Sheila Elizabeth Abraham. She's our former HOD. She also sends you a heartwarming comment in the chat box. I just want to read it to you. Thank you so much for a lecture that has incorporated so many disciplines. I'm reminded of Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide that speaks of destruction of Sundarbans.
Yes.
Toni Morrison's Star Baby, which of ecological devastation in Caribbeans. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Though it's a bit late in the evening. Thank you for staying together. So we have had a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And the one more comment, Dr. J. Anbaragan.
Yeah.
He says, it's a rewarding experience to listen to you, sir. Too much of information in a short period of time with load of global references and local examples, which all had scientific, cultural, religious, and personal connect. Thank you so much. It was a zeal listening to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank
So
you.
those are similar comments. A lot of comments are there. Since we don't have much time, I'm not reading it
Right.
all.
Is there any other question which I can answer?
So
Forget
just
those compliments. I will read it myself. Okay. So if you have any question forthcoming, I'll take one more question before I leave.
okay, just a moment, sir. Sir, can you talk of any representations of environmental movements in literature?
Right. Environmental movies. Okay. I'll talk about movies that are that celebrated. I do not know how many of you have seen Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. That's an old movie. Then, have you seen the film Congo, right? How many of you have seen the film Congo? Right. Okay. And how many of you have seen the film The Day After? It was a 1980s film. This talks about a nuclear Armageddon and what happens. Actually, it's a very apocalyptic and a dystopian film, The Day After. Of course, in the 1980s, it was the peak of Cold War between NATO and Warsaw Pact nations, and people thought that there would be a third world war. And the film The Day After, very impressive English film, and what happens to the world after nuclear showdown. Yeah. Then there are many such films. Okay, it's up to you to just explore. Okay, I'm not able to immediately recall. There are many apocalyptic versions of films, but this film, Waterworld, with that I will stop. Maybe that is relevant to us. I'm sure most of you must have seen the film Waterworld. Okay, in that film, the water covers the world. Okay, all the glaciers have melted, the ice has disappeared. And that is this one poignant scene where there's a small girl, she's fond of carrying a pot with a small plant in it. Okay, and that's her price to. She wants to go back to her land, and this man tries to ferry them from one part to another part of the world, and he has even developed his legs, which are almost fin-like. Okay, you must have seen, and at one moment, that woman shows her face in disgust looking at his leg because he has spent much time swimming on the water and almost fish-like flaps he has developed. Then finally, the last part of the film, they reach a particular place. I do not know how many of you, in the first time when I saw the film, I missed it. I missed the significance of it. Then the second time when I saw, oh God, I know what they were trying to tell us. The place they land their boat is on the top of Mount Himalayas, because there is a plaque that which shows this is the place where Edmund Hillary and Tenzing came, climbed and planted their flag. There is a plaque there, and water splashes against that. That means the water level of the world has reached nearly 9,000 meters above the sea level. Then I sat back on my chair. This is the message they're trying to drive home. The water has covered. And another important moment is he takes down her and he shows all the skyscrapers. New York City is underwater. Right. Now, these are the films, maybe far-fetched and a bit scary, but this is a possibility. Okay? Watch that film of Waterworld. All right? There are many such films like this. Okay.
Thank you. Can I ask one last question?
Yes, Nashika.
Won't corporate environment responsibility... yes. So, no, sir, I've already asked it. Yes, that's it. We are done.
Okay, fine.
We are done. Thank you so much, sir, for this great session. We have come to the close of day 3 session, and I'm sure that our participants had a fruitful time, the way they were responding. It was a great time we had. Hope to see you sometime later, sir, for the sessions that are to follow. Thank you so much. Now we are moving on to a vote of thanks by Professor Nima Susan Matthew.
Good evening, everyone. We were just listening to the third lecture of the International Lecture Series titled Effacing Culture of Extinction, Exploration of Green Philosophies and Representations, conducted by the Postgraduate and Research Department of English, Mathama College, Tiruvalla. On behalf of the host institution, I take this time to propose vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this event. First of all, I would like to thank God Almighty for making today's function a success in all possible respects. An ignited mind is a powerful weapon to fight against any evil, and here it's the climate change that we are fighting against. Through this lecture series, we are aiming to provide a platform for sharing concerns, practical challenges, solutions, its cultural representations, as we work together to provide our Mother Nature a sustainable future. We are fortunate to have eminent and expert speakers for our sessions. Today we had Dr. D.E. Benet with the title Renewal of Our Minds Towards a Green Deal. His talk was an exploration of ecological and cultural consciousness. He reviewed and analyzed the equation among nature, man, and culture. Being a master of language and literature, he elucidated how nature is embedded in myths, legends, and literature across languages. He made us understand the dire need of making a green deal and also the need for developing environmental intelligence. The implementation of Great Green Wall of Africa is a relieving, happy news for us all. Sir, I'm sure that the participants have taken note of your findings, opinions, and will be discussing it within their realms. I thank you for taking out time from your schedule and enlightening us with your knowledge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Varghese Matthew, sir, for giving permission to organize this series and giving us all the support. We have many participants, teachers, both retired and working, research scholars, students from many parts of the country, also from other countries. We treasure your contributions and time with us. I hope you all can utilize the aspects of the program which were of particular interest to you. We look forward to hosting you in future too. Thank you all. The organizing team led by our HOD, Dr. Ashley Susan Phillip, have competently worked to orchestrate this series. The conveners of the program, Professor Shushmita and Varghese and Dr. Remy, Cherry and George, you deserve our appreciation. I also really respect the unflinching enthusiasm and the coordination, mainly at the technical level, behind the screen, of all the faculty members of the department. As you all know, it takes the whole department to conduct a virtual meeting. Thank you all. Let's just keep up the spirit. I thank Professor Sheba K. Jacob, who introduced the guest and moderated today's question and answer session. I also thank the student choir for leading us in prayer with your melodious song. Let me conclude with a reminder. We have one more lecture left in the series, which will be delivered by Dr. Rakhi Kalita Moral on the topic, Whose Hills Are These? Women's Lives and Affective Geographies in Northeast India, which will be conducted on 4th of December 2020 at 4 p.m. Indian time. We expect you all to be there. I once again thank each and every one of you. May you all have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.